welcome to another edition of But Have You Heard About with your host, Courtney. And today I'm joined by a special guest, Paola. Did I say that right again? Did I mess it up again?
No, you said it right.
Perfect.
You passed.
I passed the test. I'm really excited. Paola and I actually met through a mutual friend on Facebook, Erica. So shout out to Erica. She's been on the show before. Super excited. And hopefully she'll be here again during spooky season in October. And she posted something about Puerto Rico and basically how the U.S. government went in and decided to force sterilization mostly upon women. And it just kind of made me perk up and I was like, ooh, I want to talk about this subject, especially on my podcast, because these are little known facts of history. And before we get into what the U.S. government did in Puerto Rico, I want to give a little bit of backstory on where this ideology of forced sterilization came from. And for forced sterilization, for those that have never heard this terminology, is basically you are being forced against your will or you are unknowing that for women, you're getting a hysterectomy. It doesn't matter what age you are. The U.S. government will just do it. They'll tell you, a doctor could lie to you, say you're getting your appendix out, or something happened when you were getting your tonsils out and now they had to go into your stomach for some reason. Who knows? Maybe it swallows your tonsils and that is their story for why they're correcting me now. It's horrible. The whole reasoning why people have this idea is from the pseudoscience of eugenics. And if you believe in eugenics, then you're definitely part of the KKK or the Nazis or you're a white supremacist. We all know that eugenics is pseudoscience because you can't breed people like you would with cattle or pigs. I used to...
Cats, dogs, all that stuff.
Exactly. And it's basically the ideology that white people were somehow superior and you needed to only breed smart people that had great genetics, that were great at certain things. And it was the pseudoscience that was used for slavery, for the reason why you don't want to pay people as well as you can. And even in the US, we had a Supreme Court case back in 1927. It was Buck versus Bell. And the Supreme Court basically was all for forced sterilization in 1927. And even Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And there was only one dissent. So it was 8 versus 1. It blows my mind. That's never been turned over. And so starting in 1927, if you happen to be in a mental institution, and they were, or you were blind, you were deaf, or you were dumb, your family could take you to go be sterilized and you would have no idea about it. Or if you happened to be in a mental institution or if you were arrested, they could just decide they wanted to do that because they thought that you were acting crazy, whether you were or weren't. And during the 1950s, the US government also started doing undercover, in a sense, forced sterilization to the Native Americans. And it's still being felt now. And they were doing it up until about 1974.
That's not that long ago.
I know.
The 70s is not that long ago.
And it's still being done. And so one of the reasons that they did it definitely had to do with money and the fact that they promised in like an 1830-something treaty that they would provide medical assistance when by taking land over. And because they're like, well, if there's less people, I understand, but I also am like, this is a horrible thing for you to...
A lot of what you're saying is very close and similar to what happened in Puerto Rico. They take advantage of a situation and they take advantage of the people and they show up in their suits and their doctor suits and all this stuff. And, we're here to save the day. And that's not really what happens.
Exactly. So they would lie to people about what surgeries you were getting. And we can relate this to what's going on now. What we just found out in a detention center, I believe it's in Georgia, and you have a coming out. And for people that are acting all shocked and appalled, you don't know that our nation's history revolves around the fact that our government has been doing this. And even though they pretend they're not into population control, which if you decide that you want to Google U.S. population control, they have a very hard stance that they don't want to control the population. They don't want to be like China. But at the same time, the government itself is concerned about overpopulation, especially on an island like Puerto Rico. It's hard to hear. And then think about the fact that it was only like 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Well, in Puerto Rico, when they enacted Law 116, the last eugenic sterilization law passed under the United States territorial jurisdiction. So when they passed that, it was like a free-for-all. It was like a free-for-all for doctors on the island. And a lot of the things that they were doing, like you said, they would lie to the people. They gain their trust and then they lie to them and they take advantage of them. So it's kind of crazy because, I learned about what happened in Puerto Rico because my family, we're all a bunch of women. My father's a historian. We're all from Puerto Rico. My family served in the military. My dad, my grandfather, my great uncle, we have a lot of military history. So I've always gone back and forth between like United States history and Puerto Rican history. And for me, when I, like you said, when I saw these people talking about everything that's happening now with the whistleblower, Dawn Wooten. So when she talked about it and it blasted on Facebook, and that's how you and I met, I was just like, oh my God, it's happening again.
Yes, it is ridiculous. And the fact that it was also a woman of color who came out, it's a Black woman, is a nurse that came out because nobody else was saying anything. And it's not like she was the only nurse there.
Yeah. She was saying that she was like slowly getting demoted because she would bring it out, like she would start talking about it, or like people would ask her if the uterus collector was coming. And she was like, the uterus collector? Like, what are you talking about? And then more women were talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And that's when she started like, actually listening to the people, what they were saying. And that's how she found out.
The whole idea about just being for sterilization, again, it's going back to eugenics, and that we're going to breed this mass super race of people, which propelled Nazis. And the fact that there's so many famous Americans that were huge proponents of eugenics throughout, the 19th and the early 20th century. And there's still a lot of people who believe in it today. When they think of, athletes getting together and getting married, they're like, oh, they're the most athletic baby in the world. And then the kid winds up being like, look, I really like video games. I'm just
Yeah.
And with the forced sterilization, it's almost a way of cleansing in their mind the negative or less desirable traits. And with immigration, especially with taking, having Puerto Rico as a part of the U.S. territories and thinking that, they have to provide for those people because they are U.S. citizens, the U.S. government was basically like, look, we need a control. It's an island. And the only way you can help with resources is by doing X, Y, and Z. They did the same thing with the indigenous Native American population here too. And it just bothers me beyond belief.
So going back to what happened in Puerto Rico was, I believe about 35% of Puerto Rican women were sterilized. That's a lot. That's like 1 out of every 10 women were sterilized.
They didn't know that it had happened. So if, let's say, they only had one child or they didn't even have any kids and they're trying to have kids and they're like, why can't I have kids? This is making no sense. And they had gone in for, again, a routine procedure type of surgery. And you come out feeling horrible and you don't know what happened.
But you know what plays in a big part of it, though, is like their excuse is like bad income or like poor people, they're going to take over and all this stuff. But at the end, they're the ones that created these, quote, poor people. They're the ones that created these ghettos. They're the ones that created all of this because it's part of their plan. I see here in what I was reading earlier today was that Law 116 by U.S. colonialism by 1925, owing to the 1898 U.S. invasion and the subsequent devaluation of the peso and the dispossession of ranchers and farmers by the U.S. sugar interest, 70% of the Puerto Rican population lost their land, with 2% of the population owning 80% of the land. So when the U.S. went ahead and took over the island, which people are like, oh, Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. I'm like, no, Puerto Rico was invaded. We were invaded by the U.S. There's a difference. And when they invaded, it was illegal to speak Spanish. It was illegal to wave your Puerto Rican flag. Puerto Rico was striving. We used to have sugarcane. That was our main export. We used to have, well, now back maybe like 20, 30 years ago is very pharmaceutical. Like we had a lot exports that people on the island could survive, live. There was free healthcare. There was free education. There was like, Puerto Rico was very, very progressive. We had a train system that went around the whole island. And once the U.S. took over, they destroyed the train system. They destroyed the sugarcane crops. They basically cut off the Puerto Rican people's income. They cut people off from their land. They created this poverty. And then once that poverty started happening and growing, that's where like the eugenics or the people, what are they called? The U.S. eugenicists? That's what they were called? Yeah. Eugenicists. They seized on the resulting poverty, blaming overpopulation and targeting poor women for sterilization, as well as pharmaceutical experimentation. Puerto Rico is one of the biggest pharmaceutical production areas for the United States. After Hurricane Maria, we produced, well, we as in Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico produced IV bags, ibuprofen, Tylenol. There's the pharmacies over there are like Pfizer, the Medtronic, all that stuff is in Puerto Rico. The eugenicists were like, all right, we got all this poverty, we got all this stuff going on, let's experiment. Let's go ahead. And what's crazy is a lot of Puerto Rican people have told me, they're like, oh, well, if it wasn't for that, Puerto Rico's very liberal. We believe in women's rights. And I'm like, bullshit. That is complete bullshit. You do not believe in women's rights. You're talking about a place that's like 1,000 churches. It's very Roman Catholic and Christian there. So it's like, no, this is all part of their agenda. In the end, they would even tell women like, hey, you can't get welfare or you can't sign up for this government stuff if you have too many kids. Like they would just try and convince them, or like you said, lie to them completely. And they go in to get a checkup and they wake up and they've been sterilized.
Yeah. And it's not like that just came out of the blue. So there were laws that require sterilization of citizens that, again, were deemed unfit. And the very first law in the US was actually in Indiana in 1907. And it was to prevent the procreation of confirmed criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists. And by the end of the 1970s, most states had repealed their own sterilization laws. And there have been some states that have definitely come out and apologize that they ever had those laws in the first place. But just because you apologize for it now doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
And in 1914, there was created a eugenics record office. They wanted to put an end to ongoing court challenges of the whole law of mandatory sterilizations. And the fact that the government went that far that they wanted to keep it in place, they set up the chain of events that not only went on for Buck versus Bell, but what they did to minorities in this country and having the free for all. I mean, I went and had my gallbladder removed back in 2018, and I'm like, I don't know, they could have taken so much more out. I didn't know what they were doing. And I'm sure that that's what happened when in Puerto Rico and with our indigenous people here for Native America. It blows my mind, basically. And
this is the dirty laundry they don't want anybody to know. Back then in the day, didn't think internet would exist and we could easily just share news happening. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Like back then, it was like, oh, I got a letter weeks later, and oh, okay, this is happening. That was the original tweet, the snail mail. And I think right now something that's really big, at least different from now and then, is that there's people can call people out. There's information being shared, there's photos, videos. And another thing, like we were talking about, like everything that's going on politically, people are talking about, it's a race war, they're racist or are coming back out. I'm like, dude, they've always been there. Like Nazis didn't just disappear. A lot of them moved to South America. I've met South American people from Venezuela, from other countries. I used to live in Venezuela for like 3 years, but I've met people like all around South America and even Central America that are pro-Nazis. So I want to kind of take it back to what we were talking about. But I found some information. These women that were sterilized basically recently, I'm not even talking about the 1950s. I'm not talking about the 60s. I'm talking about 2020. Women are still getting, sterilized. But when you go back to the history and you see the pattern that the government creates where they show up, they disable or destroy the economic system in wherever they're coming up, like going to. Then once the poverty takes over, they use that as a green light or as an excuse to, hey, this is our time. Let's go ahead and sterilize all these people.
Yeah.
And it's a repeat, like you said, they did it to the Native Americans. They did it to at the immigration center over here. It was in Georgia. And something crazy that I want to go even deeper down this history was, have you ever heard of Cornelius P. Rhodes?
I have not.
Oh, girl, he looks like the evil Nazi like villain from from every like Captain America movie with him fighting Nazis. He's that evil doctor. So he was a pathologist, an oncologist, and a hospital administrator who was involved in racism and unethical human experimentation scandals in the 1930s, as well as subsequent whitewashing. So he was specialized in anemia and leukemia, And guess who he worked for? Not
Who?
only was he in the army, he was part of the Rockefeller Institute.
Oh,
Yeah,
lovely.
lovely, right? So he was in Puerto Rico for 6 months, and I believe it was like back in 1932. And he was there to, quote, fight cancer. No, he was not. This guy literally wrote a letter, and the letter was him talking about how he killed his patients, how he used women and people in general for experiments. It's basically the Nazi that got away and he ended up in Puerto Rico. And dude, he's horrible. He's a horrible person. But yeah, so he did the human experimentations. He used to take in kids that were orphans, poor, women, basically anybody that, he could get away with. Like the government didn't care.
Yeah.
So he was like having a free for all. And he would use like religion like for his side. But the worst thing I believe that happened was that basically our Martin Luther King, his name was Pedro Albizu Campos, and there was a lot of government. He was basically fighting. He was fighting for the independence of Puerto Rico back then, right?
Okay.
But he's Puerto Rican, he's black. He graduated from Harvard. He was a lawyer. Like he got his degrees and all this stuff. And a couple of years after him fighting for the freedom of Puerto Rico, I would have to double check if Cornelius was a part of it. I believe he was because he was the asshole like running all the shit. But Pedro was caught by the US government because the government was scared of him for, talking about freedom and all that stuff. And they ended up torturing him for several months with radiation and they killed him.
What?
Yeah,
Okay, that is a
for
rabbit
sure.
hole.
But yeah, there's a letter. You should read the letter. It says on 10 November 1931, Rhodes was at a party at a Puerto Rican co-worker's house in Sidra. After having some drinks, he left and found his car had been vandalized, several items stolen. He went to his office and he wrote and signed a letter addressed to Ferdy, Fred W. Stewart, a colleague from Boston, by then working at the Memorial Hospital for Cancer Research in New York. He wrote the following: Dear Ferdy, the more I think about the Larry Smith appointment, the more disgusted I get. Have you heard any reason or advance for it? It certainly is odd that a man out with the entire Boston group fired by Wallach, and as far as I know, absolutely devoid of any scientific reputation, should be given the place. There's something wrong somewhere with our point of view. The situation is settled in Boston. Parker and I are to run the laboratory together, and either Kenneth or McMahon to be assistant, the chief to stay on. As far as I can see, the chances of my getting a job in the next 10 years are absolutely nil. One is certainly not encouraged to make scientific advances. One is the handicap rather than an aid to advancement. I can get a damn fine job here, and I'm tempted to take it. It would be ideal except for the Puerto Ricans. They are beyond doubt the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate and thievish race of men ever inhabiting this sphere. It makes you sick to inhabit the same island with them. They are even lower than Italians. What the island needs is it's not public health work, but a tidal wave or something so totally to exterminate the population. It might be livable. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer in several more. The latter has not resulted in any fatality so far. The matter of consideration for the patient's welfare plays no role here. In fact, all physicians take delight in the abuse and torture of the unfortunate subjects. Do let me know if you hear any more news. Sincerely, Dusty.
Oh. Oh. So
Yeah.
I did catch a glimpse that he supposedly said he wrote this in anger and in jest and a joking manner, which, homie, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't. How are you going to write about killing people and putting cancer and then be like, nah, I'm just joking? Like, that's not a joke.
It's not. And you're talking about past tense. You're not talking, like, if you were joking, you'd be like, in the future, I'm not going to cure them. I'm going to give them cancer. But you didn't say that. You said you killed people and you transplanted into several others.
And, yep.
I know that we've had sterilization in the US, but to know to the extent that the government itself went to not even recognize what they've done in the past.
Well, it's that whole well, whatever, it's in the past, get over it. That's what it is. But it's like you can't get over it when you're still doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Imagine having footage or audio of these doctors talking about sterilization on women today. Like someone was able to get that shit and put it on TikTok. People wouldn't, it's so crazy that people wouldn't even believe it, I think. That's the thing. People don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah. So you have the Tuskegee Airmen, you have this distrust of the U.S. government going back. And I mean, they forcefully injected into Black American men syphilis, and they wanted them to have it for 40 years to see what the long-term effects, and they never told them that they had it.
Like going back to what we're talking about, this sterilization thing, it's just really scary. Like the boogeyman is the government. That's what I tell people. Like, do you really do you really think they care? Like, do you really think they care about this pandemic and the health and safety of our people? Fuck no, they don't give a rat's ass. They're waiting for everyone to die off and so they could come in and buy the land. Yeah. That's what they do. They did that even after Hurricane Maria, and they did the same thing in New Orleans after Katrina. Let them die off, whatever. And then they'll go in, and all these people that have to move away because, you know, their land got messed up or whatever, they come back and there's a Starbucks. It's all gentrified. Ugh. Whatever. At least we have good food. I just think that women in general, for any women out there, any men, people, just human beings in general, take care of your mamas, take care of your daughters, take care. We are targets. Unfortunately, we live in a world where women, we are targets. Why? Because we create life. In the end, we create life, and a lot of people don't like that. They don't want us to have that power. And they will go and cut you up and steal your uterus, just like the lady said. Is the uterus? Imagine having someone come up to you scared saying, is the uterus collector coming?
I can't even imagine that.
I think that in the end, a lot of people are very, wow, I can't believe this is happening. Oh my God. And thank you so much. Like being able to talk about it and going back in history and be like, hey, it happened here, it happened here, it happened here. I feel like the United States needs to stop repeating these mistakes, and they need to progress. We need to think bigger instead of fighting each other. We need to get together and move forward, because if not, we're going to be stuck. Like Cobra Kai says, we're going to be stuck like cement. We got to move forward. So I've been watching Cobra Kai.
I love it.
I just finished season 2 last night.
I'm really happy to have these conversations because these are things that I didn't know about. And if I didn't know about them, and I, went to college, I was a history major in college. If I didn't know about them, I assume that the vast majority of people, especially in the U.S.,
no idea. Yeah.
And
there's one lady I wanted to talk to you about real quick.
Yeah.
There's a doctor named Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trias. She was the first Latina to be elected president of the American Public Health Association and was a founding member of committee to end sterilization abuse.
Wow.
So, yeah. She was saying that the program designed by the Eugenics Board was intended to catalyze economic growth and respond to Depression-era unemployment. Both U.S. government funds and contributions from private individuals supported the initiative. Instead of providing Puerto Rican women with access to alternative forms of safe, legal, and reversible contraception, U.S. policy promoted the use of permanent sterilization. The procedure was so common in Puerto Rico at the time that it was simply referred to as la operación. La operación means the operation. Like, did you get the operation? Like, that's basically what it was.
What? Okay. That's news. That's interesting.
Yeah. Institutionalized encouragement of sterilization through the use of door-to-door visits by health workers, financial subsidy of the operation, and industrial employer favoritism towards sterilized women pushed women towards having a hysterectomy or tubal ligation, also known as tying the tubes. The coercive strategies used by these institutions denied women access to informed consent. More than 1/3 of the women in 1968 study did not know that sterilization through tubal ligation was a permanent form of contraception. The euphemism tying the tubes made women think the procedure was easily reversible.
And they did the same thing with Indigenous Native American women. where they would say, you can have this, it's a short procedure. We know now that obviously it is forever. So to have a woman's tubes tied is not, it's not like a shoelace where you can untie it. It is literally being like nip your tubes, and they're just
exactly. And that's the crazy thing. Like, men's are a lot easier than women. Men's are reversible, and it's just a little thing. Like, for a woman, like, you have to cut open my stomach to get to my like, you have to go through my skin, like, lift up layers, take out intestines, take out all this stuff. Like, it's insane.
We have talked for a while. Any final thoughts you have? Final thoughts on everything that we've talked about? Maybe if you have anything about the forced sterilization in Puerto Rico, and maybe like the effects it had then, or even like the long-term effects that are still being felt now.
I feel that when it comes to the sterilization, Puerto Rico has learned to not trust. Puerto Rico has a very corrupt system in place, and those people are just looking to profit. And like I said, like, just follow the money. That's what I tell everybody, no matter where, if it's in Puerto Rico, in Georgia, in Japan, in China, just follow the money, because if there's a disaster somewhere, someone is profiting from it. And being that Puerto Rico has a very long history with the United States, I feel that I lived in Puerto Rico. I had my baby in Puerto Rico. And for me, I just feel that after everything that's happened on the island, a lot of people don't understand that the government in Puerto Rico is the U.S. government. You know what I mean? Like, people are like, oh, but Puerto Rico's so corrupt. Look at the politicians, they're stealing shit. I was like, yeah, they're all, it's the U.S. government. Puerto Rico is U.S. Like, you can't try and separate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's just them. It's like, no, it's the U.S. They use Puerto Rico as legal money laundering for all their contracts. And the people that are getting, like this Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trias, she's basically a warrior fighting for the women's reproductive rights in Puerto Rico. And now so many people are brainwashed because of religion there as well. It's kind of like, oh, we don't want you to have basic rights, but at the same time, we can take you as a guinea pig and do whatever we want. For me, it's just very, I think, contradicts what they're saying. So in the end, I just say, don't trust the government. I'm sorry, but don't trust the government, guys. Like, I don't care if they're listening or not. I don't trust you. I don't trust your doctors. I don't trust your agenda. And you know what? I think what's important is finding those people, those very few people that are fighting this evil giant, finding those people that are trying to help, because there's not a lot of them. We wish there was a Avengers group running around and helping people all the time, but those are really hard to find. And the people that are fighting the fight and fighting for our rights, those are the people we got to listen to, the people that are out there, like the whistleblower. She's getting death threats right now. Why? Because she did the right thing.
You are a very insightful person. I would love to have you come back on another episode. We could find another fun topic to talk about, because this has been fun. I enjoy nerding out with you.
Oh, I'm a huge nerd.
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, this has been a really insightful and definitely touched on a lot of different stuff for history episode of But Have You Heard About? And I'm going to leave us with some closing remarks of learn from history. And if you are surprised that the U.S. government is doing some heinous shit, it's probably been doing that heinous shit for years.
Yeah, welcome to the club.
Welcome to the You Just Found Out club.
Yep.
And with that, make sure you vote. Early voting starts in a lot of states in like mid-October. Get your life out there. Go vote. If you're scared of the coronavirus, the earlier you do and do early voting, the less likely there will be people in crowds. A lot of time you can go at 7 a.m. and you can go and stand in line at 6 p.m. Thank you guys again for hanging in there with us and learning about sterilization in Puerto Rico and throughout the U.S. history. And with that, have a fabulous rest of your day. Bye.
Have a great weekend. Bye.